Okay, we are live. Yet another Ask Us Anything session with Scott as a
Hello.
initially temporary, now obviously permanent guest in the show. So there is no way out anymore. This is Matrix Scott.
Exactly.
Okay. So, but first of all, we have a new member. Thank you, team. Members are people who put the price of coffee monthly to the channel without getting anything in return. Thank you so much. By the way, money from membership that went into the fancy new thing that you see in front of the screen. And Scott, he got a mic. Now he sounds like a human being instead of whatever he sounded before.
Exactly. Well, glad that, I apologize for all those that now need to listen to me more clearly.
Okay, let's go straight into the questions. Some that we didn't answer before. We're going to mix them with those that are live. And the first one is I cannot answer because it's addressed directly to Scott. And we're going to throw him under the bus now. Scott, what do you think about Pulumi?
So, my thoughts about Pulumi are that I don't understand it to any extent. I understand that the term is infrastructure as code. However, I do not believe that that is the correct approach. I think that IAC is, but that's infrastructure as config. I think that defining it as code initially sounds like a really good idea. But because tools like Pulumi still have to build a DAG basically of your resources ahead of starting that deployment, there aren't many benefits in my mind to that actual definition over things like HCL or other tools like YAML, depending on Crossplane, Terraform, whatever. I think that the barrier to entry is much higher, and the ability for me to diff what is going on or to debug it is always going to be harder. You want your infrastructure as code to be, in the end, YAML. How you got there, I don't care. How you got there could be writing JavaScript with CDKs that goes and generates something. It could be Python that exports YAML. But what you need in the end is that your infrastructure as code, however you generated it, needs to be a declarative format so that it is easy for anyone to understand without knowing that language. I think that's where Pulumi falls. I just don't see it as a main contender in this area. I think that Terraform / OpenTofu are great in that world. If you want to build a control plane, I think Crossplane is the right solution.
There you go.
How about you, Victor?
Oh, it was addressed to you, and now I'm using that as escape hatch, not to answer it. Right?
Okay.
There you go. I'm not saying anything. Actually, I will say something that is not directly related to Pulumi, right? Mm-hmm. I have nothing against writing something in code as a way to generate declarative output. As a matter of fact, actually, I like it. Right?
Right.
So it might have sounded when you said kind of like code is bad. I think it's great. Just kind of we might want
to generate declarative.
So let me put it this way, and this applies to, let's say, applications as well, GitOps, doesn't matter, right? I want two things. I want to be very proficient and when defining stuff, and very often I'm more proficient in not YAML. Like I prefer KCL, right? Yours can be Python, whatever, doesn't matter. I want that. But I want also somebody to be able to go and say, okay, let me see what you wanted. And that's where YAML shines, right? I can go to a Git. I'm not answering Pulumi, just to be clear. I can go to Git and say, oh, you wanted a deployment with this image, right? Not like, hey, okay, you wanted a deployment. Let me now go somewhere else and check the value of this and then see whether there is a condition on a loop and stuff like that. So I want both. I want to write code, and I want the output to be declarative.
Exactly.
Tools like people would say Helm is declarative, and I'd say it's not at all. Kind of like
No.
not at all declarative. Even HCL is not completely declarative. It's a declarative-ish, right?
Exactly.
Until you
Anything
start
that's templated, anything that is templated is not actually declarative. You have to render the template and then it becomes declarative.
So from that perspective, actually, I could put HCL and let's say something written in Go in actually the same basket, right?
Yeah, you can, but can I ask you a question? If you took any person on the street and showed them an HCL file or Go code, what is the ability, because of the limitations of HCL, the ability of someone to understand it, even though it's not 100% declarative, is going to be so much higher than them understanding the Go code?
No, I give you that 100%. So actually, that's the part the part I don't really like is when you start with something declarative and then you butcher it in a way to become, declarative that has imperative capabilities, right? Like when I look at certain tools that have YAML as a format, and then I see that, we had a need to do this, and then they start butchering it kind of by adding some special constructs. And then we get into some strange situation. I'm not saying that HCL is that, but...
That sounds like patch and transform.
Oh, patch and transform is horrible. Absolutely horrible. Yeah. I'm really glad that we got rid of it. For those of you not aware, Scott is referring to...
That's the old way
Crossplane.
that Crossplane worked.
Yes.
Exactly.
So, but Crossplane actually successfully...
Got away from it.
I would say... almost successfully managed to stay away from those things while it was only YAML. And people were suffering a lot and so on and so forth, right? But yes, patch and transform, rest in peace. There are people who ask for it to come back. And I'm telling you, while I'm alive, I'm going to fight you. It's horrible.
Okay.
Okay, let's go now to the live question. No filter, whatever comes first. Setting up an on-prem Kubernetes cluster for 100 users, planning to scale, key considerations, tools, strategies, and what to buy versus manage yourself. Since it's on-prem, I will let you, Scott, answer. The only thing I will give a single sentence before, start with Kubernetes distribution. Please don't build your Kubernetes. Kind of like, don't do that.
Exactly.
And from there on, I think it greatly depends on what the distribution gives you to begin with. So, but Scott, you're more on-prem than I am.
Yeah. So I would say, again, it really depends on where your end goal is. If your end goal is just on-premise, or if your end goal is also multi-cloud, let's say. It depends if your end goal is one large cluster or if you're actually better off with multiple smaller clusters, which is typically the truth. You're typically much better off having a few small clusters rather than one huge cluster. Your blast radius goes down many things. There's a bit of an overhead, though, of the control planes, right? So you have to find the right balance. Definitely, it's buying a distribution is the number one thing that should be purchased. It should be one that is based off of cluster API. Anything that isn't is stuck in the archaic ages and should be disregarded at all levels. I think that in the end, if you are talking about multi-cluster management, my general approach is that if you're going to have over 10 clusters, you should be looking at something that has fleet management capabilities in it as well. There are many tools in this area, be that the open source variants such as like Rancher, which also has a commercial offering, or the more commercial ones like SpectroCloud, D2IQ, Tanzu, Advanced Cluster Manager from OpenShift. But like those are the areas that I really think purchasing makes a lot of sense. The one other one that purchasing really makes sense is two other areas. One is storage. A lot of times things like Portworx or that sort are going to be very beneficial when you're on premise, especially if you're in bare metal, because good luck finding a good CSI when you're running on bare metal. So that's, a challenge, and managing Rook and Ceph yourself is not fun. Unless if you're on OpenShift, then you have that with their support. The other one is resource optimization tools. You mentioned here planning to scale all of that. I believe the tools like Perfect Scale, Cast AI, ScaleOps, all of these tools that exist out there for resource optimization started initially talking about cloud, right? And, we can save you money. My approach is very different, and I think those are more important on-prem than they are in the cloud. In the cloud, my build may be $1,000 more this month. On-premise, I don't have room to grow. So it's way more important in my mind that you can actually continue to grow and utilize the resources that you have bought efficiently than the extra $1,000 that it cost me this month because I was less efficient. Now, that doesn't mean don't be efficient. You need these in the cloud as well. But on premise, and I just don't know of any good open source tools in that area. Those are the major buys. Everything else is what you got from the distribution, use. What you didn't get from the distribution or fleet manager, build yourself, I would say.
One thing I would add to all that is, excluding the scenario in which you are experienced with certain things. Like, let's say that, you're already using OpenShift, you're familiar with it and stuff like that, and you go with OpenShift, cool, right? In all other cases, I would always say, always start with open source and then upgrade later. Meaning get familiar with it, right? Because it's so easy to make a wrong purchase when a sales guy comes from a company and says, you should buy this and that, right? Don't go for commercial directly. Unless if it's a service, like if it would be cloud and say, I can go for GKE, but I'm not really committing to it right away.
Right.
I could switch if I don't like it. So to me, that's the beauty of open source model. Kind of, you start, you try the different things. You say, this is the thing. I'm going to use, I don't know, Argo CD, whatever it is. And then I'm missing something. Is there a company who will give me that something? I give them money. You get something back. That's fine. But you can make a decision first.
Yeah. So I would say I kind of agree with that. I think that the one thing, like the way that I would approach that typically is not necessarily start with open source, but only choose a vendor that actually follows industry standards and uses open source tooling with enterprise support. For example, a tool that builds their own GitOps solution and does not integrate Flux or Argo CD into there and tries to tell you to use something else. No. If something comes and says, we have our own, CLI, don't use kubectl. Okay, that was a bit too obvious who I'm talking about, right? But there's 100 examples of different vendors and tools that exist out there that think that they need to reinvent the wheel. And then you're creating a vendor lock-in for no reason. Find a distribution that follows industry standards, that is relatively up to date. Look at if they offer add-ons. This is something that I was talking with someone about earlier today. If they offer, let's say, I don't care if they offer 5, 10, or 20 add-ons, okay? But take those even 5 add-ons, check the version upstream that exists, and check the version that they're offering and see how far back it was and when that was released. That is a good indicator of how aligned with the community that company is at this point. The ones that are closer to that, those are the ones I would put my money on.
100% on that one. Okay, next one. What is the best way to deploy network policies? Can we keep it in the same repo as Helm application manifest files? How we should deploy network policies in pod security admission? A quick one from me, and I'm not going to enter into discussion where those files should be, Git organization. But the way I like to think about those things in general, not necessarily even with network policies, is to think what is one-to-one relation and what is one-to-many, right? If something is directly, so let's say a database, as just to change an example. Does that database belong exclusively to an application, or is it shared with multiple applications, right? And if it belongs to application, put it wherever the application is, right? Because that's a logical, that's kind of, this is the place where everything related directly with that application, nothing else is stored. If it's a shared one, put it somewhere else, right? A cluster would be a good example. In most of the cases, 99.9% of the cases, there are multiple applications in a cluster. You put it somewhere else, right? And I'm not sure that, and excluding now the auto-generation of network policies, if you by hand define network policies for a specific application, and you have no trouble copying and pasting things in other places because network policies are mostly the same, yeah, put it where the application is.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about Scott. Anything?
I completely agree. I think things like network policies and whatnot are exactly the place where things like Inspector Gadget or other tools really come in benefit, because writing a network policy is horrible. So if you have a staging environment where you can have a tool that learns the behavior and then go and add that into production and things like that, or a baseline, I think is awesome. But again, I completely agree. Things that are shared need to be in a shared repo. Things that are per your application, everything that is dedicated to your application should be with your application, because that's the definition of your application.
Exactly. And it simplifies things like development, right? Or whatever. Okay,
Right.
So next one. This is now from before. Do you think there's a market for internal developer platforms as a product, or do most companies prefer to build their in-house solutions? Now, developer platforms as a product, we have that for a long time. Scott might disagree now with me, right? But Google Cloud Run, that's a platform as a product, right? SaaS is full of platforms as a product. Heroku is probably the best example. Up to some extent, like Fly.io as well, and so on and so forth, right? So, yeah, if you can use, if something is a service, does what you need it to do, and the price is right for you, use that, right? When we talk about building your own in-house solutions, we're talking about the situation. First situation would be, I adapt to it. The second situation is, no, I have this thing here. That's how it works. I'm not adapting to Google Cloud Run or whatever the solution, to Heroku. I need to build my own because it needs to be specific to me, right? And when I say build, before I let Scott speak, just to be clear, I don't mean build from scratch. I mean, find the tools that allow you to do that, whichever tools those are, right?
Right. So I think in the end, this all comes down to a question of terminology and what we define as a IDP, right? Is it an identity provider, an internal developer portal, an internal developer platform, right? Like, obviously, we have to, connect with an IDP to the IDP to visualize our IDP. Welcome to the geniuses in naming of the tech world. But I will disagree on terminology with Victor, but not on essence. I think that what we have from Heroku and all that is a PaaS. It's a platform as a service. I do not believe it falls under the category of what I call a developer platform. And the reason I say that is because a developer platform, in my mind, is something that covers the entire SDLC. It's something that covers the whole software development lifecycle from CI. It includes Git, it includes CI, it includes staging, it includes deployment, it includes promotions, it includes observability, it includes all these things that things like Google Cloud Run or Heroku simply don't add. Those are platforms, but not, in my mind, an IDP. That may be controversial how I define it.
It depends on what you need by SDLC. Let's say in a hypothetical situation, right? That Heroku offers you everything you need, whatever that is, right? Then it's a platform, right? You just happen to maybe be missing things because you don't know, But if
Right, but I think that any company at a even relatively small scale starts to need Git. They need source control. They need to be able to auto trigger off of Git. They have some type of testing, right? Heroku has no testing framework. Has no whatever. Neither does Google Cloud Run. It doesn't have CI.
you know how many companies I've worked with that don't test shit.
Again, how many customers do you know that are still on pre-124 of Kubernetes? That doesn't mean it's legitimate.
No,
Okay.
I agree. I mean, no, I was talking more out of principle. I do think
Right.
that. I do think that Heroku failed, and Heroku was absolutely amazing. And the reason why it failed, this is my theory, I cannot prove it, is that eventually most of the users of Heroku outgrow it, right? Eventually you get to, and I feel that that's where you're hinting, right? Eventually you get to the point and say, I need this additional thing. Let's say testing, whatever it is, right? And the problem with ready-to-go solutions is that they need to fit 100%. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The moment they do not fit 100%, you need to build something on top or completely replace it or whatsoever.
Right. So I think that's a part of it, right? I think the other thing is what we have seen is a few vendors, very small number, but large players as well as some small ones that have tried to really build that full IDP as a service. We've seen that from both open source offerings that have tried, like the CNOE, like the cloud name. I don't even know what canoe I call them. I don't know what that even stands for. Cloud native something. Or there's like Tanzu application platform from VMware, or there's Kratix, right? Like there are different solutions that have tried to build like this full IDP as a, solution. I used to be a major believer in those tools, and I still think they do have a place. However, one of the things that we've noticed also is every company loves, there's the famous line from Kelsey Haytower that I love. I'm convinced that everyone wants a platform as a service experience. The one caveat is it needs to be built by them, right? Everyone wants the experience of Heroku up or CF push, right? If you're from the Cloud Foundry world. The issue is that everyone wants to decide exactly what happens behind that CF push or Heroku up experience. That used to be nearly impossible to do in Kubernetes. Nearly impossible. It was way too much work. Today, with the tools that we have, it's becoming more and more feasible and more tangible for even medium-sized companies to take that on. So I think that when I look at this long-term, I think what we'll be able to be as a product is frameworks that help you. It will be products that you buy that become components in your platform, but I'm not convinced anymore that an entire IDP could be delivered as a product if it is targeting mass scale. If it's targeting a few huge customers, yes, right? Because you target a specific niche that you know how they work. But for mass scale, you have to build it yourself, utilizing tools from the vendors.
That's why actually like big hyperscalers like AWS, Azure, Google are not doing that, right? Because their scale is massive. They could never figure out what works for millions of users they have. Anyways,
exactly.
Next one. From Anthony, this from before. Using Crossplane functions composition, what would be the best practice to get data from existing resources? Extra resource request inside composition. So three things come to my mind. One is that's something that existing resource is something that exists in your Kubernetes cluster, right? Let's say a deployment. You can fetch data from that easily. That's relatively straightforward. Mm-hmm. If it's not already in your Kubernetes, but can be fetched by Kubernetes resource, you can, for example, in case of Crossplane MRs, you can, let's say that you already have a VPC in a cluster, right? It wasn't created by Kubernetes. You can still create a Kubernetes resource that is in observe-only mode, just looks and fetches data without actually controlling it, and then the first answer still answers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the third one is that functions are still cool, right? If there is something somewhere that can be accessed only through API of that something or whatever the method is, and there is no way that that can be a Kubernetes resource, you can still do wget, right? or CURL.
Right.
There is HTTP function. It's code. As long as you can get it, no
Right.
problem.
As long as you can get it and you can get it efficiently. That's the one thing I will say also. Make sure you do not want to be querying 1,000 lines doing processing. A function needs to return nearly instantaneously. So whatever you're doing, as long as you can get it quickly and efficiently, yes, there's a great function that was just put out by Upbound for Microsoft Graph API that allows you to query resources using the Microsoft Graph API. That's great, right? Because you may, for certain things, especially in AWS, to create an observe-only resource can be a real pain if you don't know the random ID that AWS generate as the external name so that you can add it onto the resource. If there is a function that exists out there, the function shell, that has AWS CLI built into it. So you can run AWS get S3, get your result, throw that output into the status or into your context, and then from there use it. Definitely can be used. It's just a use case by use case basis.
Okay, moving on from Aaron Green. MLOps, what it really means, is there a high demand for it in the industry? And there are very different answers, at least from me, to those questions. First, I'm sick of something ops terms. DevSecOps, MLOps, and all those stuff. Come on, kind of like the whole goal of DevOps is that we kind of put everything together in a team that is capable of doing something until the very end. That's my silly description of it, right? And I have a feeling that, terms like MLOps and DevSecOps and what's not are more expression of the need to keep the silo rather than anything else. So I don't like those terms, whatever ops. It's becoming silly. Everybody's just jumping around. Oh, now I'm ops, this ops, that ops, and so on and so forth. Is there a high demand in the industry for machine learning? And I'm not going to say MLOps. For machine learning, yes. Right? Yes. And everybody needs to some degree, right? It can be very minimal degree. Everybody needs to have at least rudimentary understanding of dev and ops. Kind of like, you cannot not be able to write a single line even of a shell script. And you cannot not be able to, I cannot even deploy container on my laptop, right? Some level of dev and some level of ops is a prerequisite for every single engineer in this industry.
Yeah.
I'm not saying become an expert. I'm not saying spend 7 years learning Kubernetes if you're writing JavaScript, right? But come on. Some rudimentary things, yes.
Yeah. And whether you call it MLOps, AI ops, data, whatever you want to call it today or whatever you call it tomorrow, the answer is yes. There is a demand for this in the industry. Anything surrounding the data world and any artificial intelligence or machine learning is, it's the buzz of today. So there is a lot of demand for it in the industry. I don't see that going away. I do see it getting fine-tuned, though, down the road. But, yes, it is a serious area.
Okay, let's do this one quick. This is on you again because it's bare metal on-prem. Quick one. Give me the name.
Cluster API using canonical MAS as your implementation, supported by multiple distros. My preference is Spectral Cloud that provide that, but you could also do that upstream. Cluster API use canonical MAS for the management.
Very cool. Alrighty, chat. What's the over-under? Scott has a dedicated mic today. That came before you appeared on the screen. Yes, he has a dedicated mic. And then there is a follow-up. Yet he got the mic, exactly. What are the biggest pain points you deal with when it comes to release promotion? How do you resolve it? Man, it's random. I think that most of the issues really when you get to release probably fall. The first two buckets that come to my mind is that we did not realize how this affects the production, kind of usually backwards compatibility. Oh, database. Oh, wait. Right? Because those are the things that are hard to check before production. And more often than not, really, I think that the release itself is often not the issue. It's what you discover later on when you're observing the system, right? Mm-hmm. It's not kind of, no, you just click a button, it's in production, and you say, it messed up. No. Wait for a couple of hours, kind of like that's that because that's when you start discovering things that you couldn't really test.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. How to migrate from Docker Swarm to Kubernetes cluster? So,
Docker Swarm. Wow, that brought me back 10 years.
I was a huge fan of Docker Swarm, just to be clear. I was placing bets on it. I actually think it's not hard because some problems were solved. First of all, let's say that you have freedom to run wherever you want. Cloud simplified a lot of, hey, how do I set up and configure and install and all that? You just get Kubernetes cluster with a click. Kind of like, that's an easy one now, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're not talking about leveraging the power of Kubernetes, but you want to have more Swarm gives you in Kubernetes, right? Starting point. Let's say that we are talking only about that. I think that's very easy. You just need to understand what is a deployment. The deployment creates a replica set which creates pods, which run containers, and you need to understand the service and ingress. With that one, you actually get more than Docker Swarm, because back in my day, I don't know how it's today, back in my day, Docker Swarm did not even have a decent ingress, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very easy. It's not that hard to figure out deployment service ingress.
Yeah.
That's 0.001% of Kubernetes, right? In practice. But it's easy. No problem at all. Yeah. And you don't even need the tools. I know that there was K-Docker, I don't know, something that transforms your compose to Kubernetes. It's so trivial to write.
There's compose with a K.
Compose with
a
exactly.
K. Yeah.
But it's so trivial. Those three are so trivial, right? I don't think you even need any tool, anything.
Yeah. I agree.
Just kind of like resist the urge to go crazy. Because I remember back in the day when I was speaking with people and they would say, oh yeah, but I need service mesh. I need this, I need that. Right. You don't need any of those things.
Right. If you were perfectly fine in Docker Swarm till today, you are perfectly fine without service mesh tomorrow in Kubernetes. Where you'll be in a year from now, let's talk in a year. But you do not need, you do not need that right now. So don't shoot yourself in the leg. Don't make it too difficult at the beginning.
Okay, this is live now from Alexander. What would be your ideal promotion strategy? Is cargo a valid option with recent updates, or do you still recommend other ways? I haven't seen the recent updates, so I cannot comment on them. I don't know if you've seen it, Scott, or not.
I've tested cargo. I haven't checked it out in the last few weeks, so I'm not sure what the recent updates were. Last I checked it, I thought this is cool. This shows some promise to it, but is so far off at this point from being ready for production that I didn't see it as viable. I saw it as, pre-alpha almost in my mind in terms of like the feature set that it had, but I thought was the first time that I saw a tool that was trying to really solve this area in a unique approach. So I'm excited about the project. I just don't know what the recent updates were, if it, made the changes that would be necessary or not.
Yeah, I have, again, ignoring the recent changes, if there are any, I'm of the same opinion. I feel, and I repeat, I feel that this time next year we might be talking about cargo as this is a must. Kind of like it has a potential to become really, really important tool. But for now, personally, I don't know what you, Scott, do. What I do is I execute YQ in my GitHub Actions and push it to repo.
I execute YTT in my GitHub Actions, and that's my promotion.
There you go. There you go. Conceptually, we are doing the same thing.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, so one from before. Serverless on AWS is fantastic. But as a developer, I still need to own so much code and know so many components. Are there answers and options in Kubernetes realm that elevate that issue? I'm going to ignore, you don't have to kind of, okay, whether serverless in AWS is fantastic or not, but it's not more complicated than Kubernetes. Unless you're very experienced with Kubernetes. Just to be clear.
Kubernetes is always going to be more complex than a managed service PaaS for the same thing. It just offers a more tailor-fitted solution that could fit you well. Now, things like the Funk CLI from Knative or OpenFaaS with its templates, things like that, do give you a really nice experience on top of Kubernetes. But there again, it's a separate tool. That is not Kubernetes that does that. That's a CLI tool that ends up generating YAML manifests from stuff that you're doing.
One way I think I can explain this is that serverless in AWS is always going to be, what was the word here? Easier, right? And less components than in Kubernetes. But somebody who is willing to do that can make Kubernetes experience in your company easier than AWS for others, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody can stitch together service mesh with Knative, this and that, and so on and so forth. And that's going to be more work than using Lambda or whatever you're using in AWS. But other people in your company might actually find it easier if you become a service provider for those people.
Yes. You can create because what you can do is create abstractions that fit your use cases instead of AWS's much wider abstractions because they have to cover the use cases of everyone, right? So like for you, if you need to, let's say, get an event, right? You don't need to care about the 35,000 different mechanisms of getting events. You could build a solution within a company because Kafka is the only way that events are streamed within your company, that everything can be hidden away into a very simple UX for the developer. The complexity on the back end, though, is much higher there, right? So it all matters at the level of scale that you're reaching.
Okay. From Ruslan, best way, Cilium. I'm going to say that Cilium is and Scott is going to disagree on that one. I know he's not so fond of it. Cilium is one of those tools. It won, kind of like it's a CNI of choice. Kind of something else might come along, but whether it's better or worse, it's not even that important anymore. It's the CNI of choice.
Cilium is one of the top CNIs, I would say for sure.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't think that CNIs are the most interesting thing in Kubernetes. I don't think that it's not. I don't think that it's one of the things that we really need to be that worried about and care as much about as people do. Yes, telcos really need to care because of the extra, the millisecond that's added on to latency in the telco world means a lot. For most applications, it doesn't. So if it's eBPF or not eBPF, I'm not saying I love eBPF. I think Cilium, by the way, is one of the most impressive projects in the CNCF. I just think that CNIs is not... It's not a huge deal which CNI you go with. There are bad solutions. Don't go with flannel. Okay, please. Do not go with flannel. Do not go with WeaveNet. Do not go right. Like there are some of these old CNIs that they don't offer network policies. They don't. Okay, so but when you look at a normal CNI, Antria, Calico, Cilium, VPC CNI, if I'm in AWS, right? Whatever it is, these all work. They all offer me network policy support. They all have some level of higher level abstractions, except VPC CNI for better network policy support than upstream. Okay, just choose one of them.
I feel maybe not yet, but getting towards the point where my answer to CNI will be the same as which container engine to choose. I don't care.
Right.
I don't care.
Just give me it. Give me network. Give me network. Exactly.
Okay. What are some dev-friendly tools that can help roll out ephemeral environments to our org? Shall we assume it's Kubernetes, Scott, or shall we go further?
I think so.
Okay, Kubernetes. Okay, I'll give you two, you give me two. Let me think, actually. vCluster, if you want not to worry about whether something will break in your cluster and you don't want to spin up a separate cluster for every environment, which you shouldn't. And let me see, one more. Okay, you go. I'll think of second one.
Okay, so I'm going to say a tool I am not a fan of, but is very good at this, which is Argo CD application sets with a PR trigger. I think is relatively dev friendly once it gets set up. So, setting up the application set, I think definitely that is one. A commercial offering that I think is good at this is Octeto. I think that their commercial offering has a good support here in the ephemeral environments to an org. For ephemeral development environments, my choice is DevPod, open source from Loft.
DevBooks. Nix packages for local.
How is that an ephemeral environment to an org in Kubernetes? Are you really going to run DevBox in Kubernetes?
No. I'm talking about local development. You said local development last example.
No. DevPod deploys to
okay. Fair
Kubernetes.
enough. Yeah. I take back what I said. Yeah, sorry. I misunderstood. Yes.
Yeah.
If it's remote,
DevPod to a Kubernetes cluster, DevPod to an AWS instance, never to local. But what it allows me to do is have that declarative feature that just create it, right? And
what I think that, it's becoming a thing, ephemeral environments, slowly for PRs and things like that. But for reasons I cannot explain, their remote ephemeral environments for development are still not catching up. And I don't have an explanation. I was sure that will become a huge thing. Because it solves so many problems. It's so complicated to set up local environment. I don't understand why companies don't do that. But Octeto, try it. Let's go back to one of the live questions. Okay, I don't have an alternative. Teleport is becoming freaking expensive and a trap. Is there a better option? I'm a cloud person. I don't need those things. I don't know about you, Scott.
It's a very difficult one because I never got into the teleport world myself. I found it to be too much dark magic that I like no. So I just don't know. I don't like things I can't grok and understand how they're going, and teleport seemed like too much dark magic to me to actually make any sense. That I just haven't followed that space.
Okay, from Lev. I don't see chaos engineering getting traction. Is that also what you see? And if so, do you think that is? If somebody asked me that 5 years ago, I would say by now, chaos engineering will be a huge thing. And I also don't see it getting traction. I don't think there is many companies using it. And the reason I think for that is that this is going to be cliche answer. It's not its time yet, right? The adoption of certain things depend on what things companies already doing, right? Many companies are still struggling to figure out what is Kubernetes, for example, right? And simply they're not ready for that. That's the only explanation. One day it will come, right? But it's probably too soon. The same like if somebody asks me, come up with only a single explanation why Heroku failed, my answer would be the same. It was too early.
So I think, I completely agree. I think its time will come. I think specifically when we look at chaos engineering and why it's not getting traction, I think is not of a lack of interest from people, but people's time is limited. And in the end, the value that chaos engineering brings to the organization is not high enough to put it high enough on the roadmap within an organization. When will it happen? I think it's like one of those things that's always like number 4 on the list, but you only have room for 3 things. But every year, 3 new things come up above it. It doesn't move down the list, but it never moves up. And I think that the only time that this is going to happen is at some point we are going to hit a recession of technological advancement before the next raise again. Right now, we're on a steep climb with AI, with all these things coming up. We've been on that through the Kubernetes world, through AI, right? We're on this big trajectory, but at some point it's going to plateau for a period. That's when chaos engineering is going to come in, because people will have that time to digest and relax a bit. They can add it in, and then it will stay with us. But we have to wait for that plateauing that'll happen at some point, or that slowing down of innovation, so that it can climb up the priority lists.
There you go. Oh, SR, thank you guys. Enough. Thank you, SR, for thanking us. Pleasure. From Veer, very basic question, but still didn't get the right answer. I think that this is a follow-up from the previous. Should we use one repo or different repositories for infrastructure as code, and config and application code? And I don't know about you, Scott, my answer is still the same. If it's directly related to that application, whatever it is, put it where that application is. If it's shared among multiple applications, put it somewhere else.
So yes and no. I will just say yes for the first 2 elements here and not for the third one necessarily. I think sometimes the separation of app code out from like the infrastructure as code elements is a good thing. I don't think that necessarily that I want my Kubernetes manifests. They should be in a GitOps repo, right? Which is my infrastructure as code. That should not be with my application code. What can be, though, is the initial Helm values, let's say, or whatever, that are used by a GitHub action to template out a Helm chart that's in another repository or even in my repository and shove that generated YAML into a GitOps repo. But I do not believe that the declaration of configuration that gets deployed should be in the same repository as my application code.
So let's say, and I'm just sticking with my one-to-one or one-to-many. Let's say that you have an application. I'm going to give you 2 scenarios, right? One application, only one environment that goes directly to production. right? Keep it where the application is, right? Now, second scenario, one application, two environments, dev and prod, right? Put it in a separate place. Now, where we might differ, but I don't think we do, right? That still does not exclude that you have a Helm chart of that application where the application is, and you have a separate repository for dev and for prod where you keep the outputs of Helm, YAML files, right? This is the description. This is how my production looks like, right? Then production is that entity, and production has many applications. I want to know what is in production, right? That's a repo. But that does not exclude. I still like to keep the main chart. Let's say that it's Helm. It could be something else in the application repo. Maybe that's developer in me. I want to be able to run it locally or something like that while developing without going to a separate repo.
Yeah, and I don't. What I don't like having it there, what I like having is in your task file, make file, just file, whatever you're using, your bash script, that it like just templates out from that Helm repository and pulls in from the remote repo. I don't like having it with my source code because I like versioning it separately from my application. I like maintaining it separately from the application. Typically, it's going to be different people within an org that may be maintaining it, or different people within the org that are the PR approvers on that, because the person that knows Go is not the person that knows Helm. Or of that sort. So I like the separation as long as your make file, task file, just file, bash script, whatever you have, makes it easy to deploy using that remote artifact.
That reminds me of conversations I had with people decades ago about CI. And it was always...
Should the Jenkins file be in my repository with my code or not?
Yeah, because
no,
it's separate other people. I know. But they were having your previous argument back then.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, there is a thing we disagree, me and Scott. Or agree partially. That's fine.
Exactly.
Okay, one from before. Could I raise the abstraction to cross after I do cluster API, messing around my home lab to test it? So I think that we Crossplane or explain Crossplane wrongly as a project, to be honest. I think that there should be different projects in Crossplane, right? There is a Crossplane providers which can serve in a semi-similar purpose as cluster API. It's not the same in any form of way, right? But somehow, right? And there are Crossplane compositions. So let's say that this question refers to Crossplane compositions, which allow you essentially to two things. To create a new API, right, with things that matter to people and hide everything that doesn't, and say, when somebody creates a custom resource based on this CRD that I just created the composition, do this. And do that can be cluster API. And now, when you should do that or no, I think that depends on whether... So all the stuff that you need to define for cluster API to make it run, right? Is that the right level of abstraction for you or not? Right? If you say, yeah, right, don't put another abstraction on top of abstraction. Don't do that. If you say, no, actually, I need people to control those three things only, right? Everything else shouldn't be accessible for them. Yes, create a CRD, and Crossplane compositions can do that. So I guess the answer is depends.
Yeah, I think that definitely Crossplane above Cluster API. I do that in my lab. So the answer is yes, it can definitely be done. I think that it's the right thing to do if you are trying to offer a complete cluster as a service, not just a bare bones Kubernetes cluster. If what you want to do is offer a, your company, right, example.com Kubernetes, then yes, cluster API for the provisioning of the cluster, it has expertise in that. Crossplane does not. Cluster API has expertise in how to manage a Kubernetes cluster. What Crossplane has an expertise in is how do I compose all these resources together into a clear custom API. And that's where you include Cluster API cluster, a provider config for the Helm and Kubernetes providers, And maybe for like, let's say if this is AWS, the AWS provider that then is going to go and create IRSA roles, and it's going to do this, and then it's going to deploy Helm charts inside of that application, and it's going to set up Argo CD or Flux and create the Git repository and customization and Helm releases or the applications in Argo CD, and you get boom. You applied one small manifest this long, and you got a cluster with Prometheus, Grafana, FluentBit, Minio, everything you needed, and it's ready to work. That's where you bring Crossplane in above Cappy.
I agree. So, from Guy, in your opinion, how would you describe a good DevOps engineer versus a great DevOps engineer? And before either of us answers that question, let's go a quick round. I'm going to ignore that I don't believe that there is such a thing, DevOps engineer, right? So let's say that there is. Let's start first with a very quick, kind of 1 or 2 sentences. What is a DevOps engineer? Scott.
Well, hold on. I need one level of clarification. I need one clarification. What it was meant to mean, or what it means today in practice?
Let's do both.
Okay, so what it was meant to mean is a developer or someone on the operations side that understands the other side. So the developer that understands operations, or operations that understands the developer side, and works together with their counterpart to reach production and to help one another move efficiently. That's what I believe it was meant to be. There was not meant to be a DevOps position. It was supposed to be a mentality that we as devs or as operations use to work together in a better culture.
100%.
What is
making? Can I redefine it, and let's see whether you agree? Making a team self-sufficient.
Yes.
Right? You can develop, you can test, you can release, you can run to production, and you can observe it in production, and that's a team. Now, if you have superhumans who know how to do all of that, every single person, please let me know. We are hiring, because we never saw that person.
Right. It's like, if you've ever met a really good full stack engineer, please let me know. I know a lot of people that call themselves full stack engineers, but typically that means mediocre front end and mediocre back end. Not, great front end or back end. Now, in practice, what I think DevOps engineer means, someone that knows how to write Jenkins files and HCL code.
Yeah, and that, I agree with that answer. That's in one company, and then every company will have a different definition.
And in the other one, it's that knows to write Pulumi and, the Cloud Foundry configuration files. And for the other one, it's going to be ECS manifests and YAML.
Yeah. It's the same person doing the same job, but with a different title, right? Whatever that is. But now, if I would, and I completely agree with that, right? But if I would remove this belief and inability that actually we will ever have DevOps engineers that actually know everything about everything in depth, because it's silly, the only other explanation I can come up with is that the better you are, the more you're moving towards consulting. And when I say consulting, I don't mean other companies necessarily, but kind of, I'm a person. I'm not, there are other people in my company who know this more than me, and this more than me. And every single thing, I'm not the most knowledgeable one, but actually I understand the system as a whole. Kind of like, I can help you here, not to do the actual work, because I'm not a freaking expert in anything, right? But but the rest of you don't
have
understand
the bird's eye view. Right. You have the bird's eye view to understand the general thing, and then you bring out the specialists to do their elements.
Exactly. Kind of like, I don't know how to create pieces of a puzzle, but I understand what the puzzle is.
Right.
In a way, right?
Yeah. I think the main difference between a good DevOps engineer, which is, someone that, creates good today in today's world. That means someone that helps create good pipelines, that helps, simplify the work for developers, let's say. Just based off of what DevOps has become, someone that actually simplifies the work for developers, that's a good DevOps engineer. Okay, that's fine. What we should be calling that position, we can debate, but what it has become, I think that's a good DevOps engineer. A great DevOps engineer is a engineer that has to have good human skills to be able to speak both the operation side and the developer side and actually translate. We think they both speak English, but they don't. He speaks dev and he speaks ops, and it's very different. So we need someone that can do that translation in real time, because that's critical. And I think the other key element of a great DevOps engineer is that they need to be someone that is approachable within the organization and someone that does not treat their developers or their customers, let's say, as stupid people. Too many times DevOps engineers treat they're stupid. They don't know what they're doing. I'm going to do all of this. No, they're stupid. They don't know. Or to the operations side, they're like, no, they're stupid. I'm going to go and do all this on my own because they don't know it. No. To be a great DevOps engineer is to empower the people that you are working with and not to degrade them. Create good abstractions for them to simplify their lives, but don't degrade them. Because you do not understand operations or dev as well as either of them do.
Exactly. So you're either one or the other or a bit of both. That's
right.
But a bit, that's an important part. Anyways, we are at the top of the hour. As always, we couldn't answer all the questions. I'm going to collect those that are pending, and we're going to continue next week.
We may need to do some session at some point, Victor, that's like no live questions just to get through all the old ones.
Exactly. That might happen. We'll see.
Awesome.
What else? Thank you so much. Yeah, well, what would be cool, if any of you watching this remembers, because I will forget, post a question about the differences between DevOps and SREs and what's or not. That might be interesting, I think, to discuss. Because I think that people mix those all the time.
And throw a platform engineer in there, at the same time.
Of course. Yeah, DevOps, platform engineering, SRE, whatever else you can come up with. And it's going to be half an hour debate. You'll see.
Exactly. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.